Another developing story over the past few weeks we're tracking for you this morning. Zimbabwe's crackdown against anti-government protesters is making global headlines. There are concerns over human rights abuses and the arrest of journalists. President Emmerson Mnangagwa is accusing protesters of staging an uprising against his government and his unleashed security forces in the two main cities of Harare and Bulawayo. Now, over 100 African writers are calling on the African Union and SADC to end their silence and suspend Zimbabwe. Dewa Mavhinga is the Southern Africa Director of Human Rights Watch. He joins us now from London. Dewa, thanks for your time this morning in South Africa. I want to ask you this question around whether we are surprised about the crackdown on the voices of ordinary Zimbabweans on what's going on in their country, given how the current government came into power.
Well, no surprises there at all, because this current government used a military coup in November 2017 to come into power. So it was a violent process which was marked by serious human rights abuses, including some killings. But there had been promises by Mnangagwa repeatedly and his government that this was a new democracy, a new dawn, and that there would be no abuses. So these people believe that perhaps it was a new chapter for Zimbabwe. But it has turned out to be a worse chapter for Zimbabwe. If you look at the escalations in abductions, cases of torture involving state security forces, with the government denying any involvement and not taking action to punish those security forces that are committing these abuses in broad daylight. We have had, cases of heavy-handed crackdowns on protesters. For example, in January last year, where the security forces opened fire, live ammunition was used, and at least 17 people were killed, and at least 17 women were raped. And again, in that particular case, there was no accountability, there was no justice, no one was arrested for those crimes. So this has become a pattern. And recently, only last Friday, there were anti-corruption protests in Harare and Bulawayo. And we saw again a crackdown that was unprecedented by the security forces, hunting down activists, harassing them, subjecting them to false criminal charges, and also sexually assaulting female activists. And this is all happening within the context of a blanket denial by this government of Mnangagwa, which has, in my view, lost all credibility in terms of being a government that could possibly respect human rights and the rule of law.
And the thing about it is, when the transition did happen in Zimbabwe and Emmerson Mnangagwa took the presidency, there was a hope from the people of Zimbabwe. But now there is this pattern of violence, of the suppression of free speech. In fact, those anti-corruption protests that you mentioned, meant to take place last week on the 31st of July, ironically coincided with renewed lockdown measures, according to the government at least, because of escalating COVID-19 numbers.
Well, it is clear that the government is using COVID-19 measures as a pretext, as an excuse to crack down. Zimbabwe has arrested more people for allegedly violating COVID-19 measures than it has tested for COVID-19 itself. So this shows that the focus is more on repression, on keeping people indoors, locked down, but without any support. The intervention package that was announced by Zimbabwe, which has not been given out, is equivalent to about 60 rands per month. And this is a pittance, it's worthless. And people are struggling. Over half the population of Zimbabwe, over 8 million people, are facing starvation and need food aid. In the capital city, Harare, over 2 million people do not have access to safe drinking water. And yet, the government is turning a blind eye to all these issues. There is massive corruption ongoing in relation to procurement. For example, the Minister of Health was fired for a tender worth $60 million where the money simply disappeared without accountability. And yet, the journalists who have exposed that corruption have been harassed, and Hopo Chingono has been arrested and is in jail at the moment pending trial. And the other journalist, Mduduzi Matutu, the police and the army raided his family home in Bulawayo and picked up and harassed and tortured members of his family, including one Tawanda Mchehiwa, who was tortured for days as he was missing. And it had to take a high court order to demand that the police produce and present the young man. And it only happened after days of torture in which Tawanda was made to drink urine, was injected with unknown substances, and was severely beaten on the soles of his feet. And this is unacceptable in a democracy. And we are saying that this is the time to put the spotlight on Zimbabwe, to say Zimbabwean lives matter, and to ensure that Zimbabwe is isolated because it has become a rogue state. It is a banana republic.
I mean, Dewa, you talk about people like Hopewell Chinono and many other journalists and activists in that country as well, every day risking their own safety and their own lives, the safety of their families as well, to put the spotlight on what is unfolding in Zimbabwe. And you talk about the government there being silent on these gross violations of human rights. Where is SADC? Where is the African Union?
Well, SADC is characteristically silent. It has always remained largely silent on Zimbabwe, particularly because Zimbabwe holds a powerful position within SADC, chairing the SADC organ troika on defense, politics and security. So it's very difficult there, but we are looking to Zimbabwe's neighbors in their individual capacities. South Africa, for example, President Cyril Ramaphosa, to apply pressure to condemn openly and publicly. And we appreciate the solidarity already coming up from some of the prominent figures in South Africa, for example, on Twitter, including Thuli Madonsela, Julius Malema, Musi Maimane, and others who are speaking out and calling for human rights respect in Zimbabwe. We are also hoping that Botswana, in its own right, will speak out against the abuses in Zimbabwe, and that President Ramaphosa, in his capacity as the chair of the African Union, will also mobilize the African Union to condemn the abuses in Zimbabwe and to demand an independent investigation into the abuses and to find a lasting solution. The world must watch and must also intervene to protect civilians, because Mnangagwa's government is using security forces with live ammunition on unarmed civilians who have not committed a crime except that they want to exercise their rights to freedom of expression and to demand accountability from an unaccountable government.
And until that happens, until at least Zimbabwe's neighbors lift their voices, you know, President Cyril Ramaphosa as well as President of South Africa and as AU chair, you talked about the other neighbors as well. Does it help that you talk about those prominent voices, the likes of Thuli Madonsela? Do those prominent voices in other parts of the continent, do they help to add pressure to the Zimbabwean government, perhaps add pressure as well to other institutions to act on that country?
Absolutely. It is very important to have these prominent voices stand up in solidarity and speak out. It helps to keep the spotlight on Zimbabwe. It helps to mobilize regional and international solidarity. If you look, for example, at the kind of global solidarity that was built around South Africa during the time of apartheid, during the campaign for former President Nelson Mandela to be freed from prison, that kind of solidarity does help. And we are saying for Zimbabwe, if more people speak out in solidarity, the international institutions for justice, the UN agencies that are responsible will take note and will take action. So we really appreciate this kind of solidarity. It is making a huge difference. And for those that are suffering, the victims of these abuses, those that are in jails in Zimbabwe, when they see this kind of solidarity, it emboldens and strengthens them in this very difficult and dark time for Zimbabwe.
Absolutely. In the meantime, those gross human rights violations continue on the people of Zimbabwe. Thanks very much for your time. Dewa Mavhinga is the Southern Africa Director of Human Rights Watch, as we continue to track the story around anti-government protesters being certainly targeted in Zimbabwe's crackdown to silence those voices.